Hello, everybody. We're back. It's Miracle Mom and
It's Miracle Mom and Mike.
Michael.
Michael.
Yeah, here we are. Here I am in my dark hole, and it is hot today. It's actually I'm sweltering because I don't have AC in this room. So if I have a glisten on my face, that's why. If I turn the fan on, it will affect the sound quality. I was having sound quality issues. All right, enough beating around the bush. Mom, you
Yes.
you almost died in December of 2019, but you almost died like 5 years prior. Is that right?
2014
Yeah. So,
March.
yeah. Oh, March. Okay. So 6 years ago now, you had another near death event. And in a previous video, way back a couple weeks ago, you had started to tell it, and then I cut you off, and we never finished it. So, do you have it within you to tell that story right now?
Yes,
All
I
right.
do. I have it within me.
All right. I will turn over the stage to you, Mother dear. I'll sit
Okay.
back and enjoy. I'll take a drink of water here.
All right.
Go for it.
Cool down. Well, this event was on March 6th, 2014. And I was living in St. Paul, Minnesota at that time. And it started out once again as just a normal morning. Got up, went about my business, and was just once again sitting at my desk. Maybe I need to stop sitting at the desk. I don't know. But anyway, I was playing whatever I was doing on the internet, and all of a sudden I started having this like a wave of I'm going to black out. You hear most people say, "Well, I'm going to faint." Well, this was worse than fainting. This was I'm going to black out. I'm going into a black hole. And it passed very quickly. Only lasted maybe for a couple seconds. And, I brushed it off. That happens now and then. I've had that happen in my lifetime before. Just brushed it off and went about my business. About 15 minutes later, it happened again. And it did get my attention, but I still didn't take it seriously. And, it again was a few seconds. And I didn't do anything. I didn't take any action. It just passed. So then maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, it happened again. And this time it was stronger in terms of time. I really was going to black out. I'm going to be gone. And there was an ugly feeling in the pit of my stomach that preceded it this time, a sense of doom. So at that point, I did get up. I got up and walked around and did sort of a self-assessment. My vision's okay. It's not blurry. I don't have a headache. No chest pain. Just kind of going through those steps, And I went out to the kitchen, got another cup of coffee, thought, okay, go sit down. So I went and sat down. And it happened again. And that's when the flag went up.
This is the third?
But the fourth time.
Fourth time.
Fourth time it happened. My alarm bell went off, and I said, something's happening. And it's just totally incredible that you can be a registered nurse, having dealt with patients all those years, heard all of those symptoms, and don't apply it to yourself. I don't know what that's about.
Get back to solitaire.
What? Yeah, right. Get this game done.
I've got more important things to deal with.
Well, you know what I did? This is how foolish we can be. I got out a piece of paper and I sat down and I said, well, this is the fourth time. I need to start tracking these. I need to put the time down and how long this is lasting. So, documentation of what was going on was my first thing to do. Well, this all started around, 9:30, 10 in the morning. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I had documented 12 events. And I'm looking at this paper, and I'm going, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, and it's 2:30. And when I was looking at that paper and realizing I was up to 12, all of a sudden, a pain hit me that was literally like a lightning bolt coming through my body, starting at the top of my head and went out my feet. That got my attention. I stood up and I yelled for Vanessa. She came running. And I just looked at her and I couldn't explain, everything that was going on to her. I said, need to call 911 right now. So she could tell, obviously, there was something wrong with me. And I was concentrating on maintaining consciousness at that time. Still no chest pain, no other symptoms. But that bolt of electricity, whatever it was that shot through my body, got me into action. And she called, an ambulance came, they showed up, hooked me up to the things they hook you up to, and the one EMT, they have equipment where they can look at your heart and see what's going on there. And the one EMT in particular looked up to the others and said, let's get her in the ambulance. I couldn't see what they were seeing. So I was able to walk, out the door. I had to go down a little hall, out the front door, and get into the ambulance. And I still wasn't having any chest pain or any other symptoms, other than every time I was going to lose consciousness, there was this ugly feeling of dread and doom that would start, in my stomach first, in my gut, and rise up into my chest and into my head, and then I'm going to black out. Well, I never did black out. The hospital they took me to was only maybe 5 miles away to a suburb of St. Paul called Maplewood, Minnesota. And they said, what hospital do you want to go to? Well, my primary physician practices at that hospital. So I said, take me to Maplewood. So that's where they took me and got me to the ER. And they brought me in and took me, got me in onto the gurney. And the doctor came in and started asking me questions. And during this whole time that I'm on the gurney, I didn't have another episode at all. So by now, I let him know I have a pacemaker. That's important, right? I do have a pacemaker, and I answered all of his questions. They hooked me up to telemetry because of my pacemaker. And these telemetry pieces of equipment have a monitor. There's a monitor beside the bed where I was, and then there's a monitor out at the nurse's station. So when they put people on telemetry, they can also see them on the monitor at the nurse's station as they go about whatever they have to do. So, drew some blood, got my medical history, what medications are you on, urine sample. They didn't start an IV at that point at all. Didn't put me on any oxygen at all. So, the time went by. I think I remember them they did do a chest x-ray. The tech came into the room where I was to do that. So anyway, an hour or so goes by, and ER doctor comes back in after he got all the reports back, looks at me and says, well, and he's scratching his head, and so far everything is coming back normal. Your EKG is normal. Your chest x-ray looks fine. Your blood work is normal. Your urine sample is normal. Everything was normal. And, I'm going, oh, okay, well, I'm glad. I'm glad everything's normal. And he turned around to walk out of the room that I was in, and the last thing I saw was his back and his lab coat. And in the twinkling of an eye, no, first he said to me, here's what he said to me before he went out of the room. He said, everything's normal, but you've had, these symptoms, and make a decision whether or not to keep you overnight for observation. Then he turned around to go out the door, and that's when the last thing I saw was his back as he went out the door. And in the twinkling of an eye, I was gone. And where I was in God's presence, where it gets very difficult to put it in words. And people who have had this experience always say the same thing. There are no words in our language to describe this. So I have to just do the best I can. But wherever I was in God's presence, it was a place. It wasn't floating around in clouds. It wasn't, some heavenly garden. It's in God's light. And I know that the light I was in was his Shekinah glory, God.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I did not have a physical body. It didn't bother me at all. I didn't care. It didn't matter. I am in God's presence. It was all about love and peace, and there just aren't words. And I knew that I was waiting in a telepathic way. Something somewhere, somehow kept reminding me, you're waiting, and everything is all right, everything's fine. There was no memory of my life on earth. I couldn't even remember I had a name. The only thing that was important was I was in God's presence and I'm waiting. No one was speaking to me. There was no music. There were no other beings, no angels, no people appearing to me. None of that. I guess the only way, it's like being laminated in God's presence. And, as far as time is concerned, forget about time. There was no reference or able to refer to anything in terms of time. All of a sudden, this black pathway appeared in front of me, like an asphalt sidewalk would be. And I looked at it with spiritual sight, and I started to question, do I follow that path, or is someone coming to get me? And again, I'm at perfect peace. It's fine with me. Well, nobody came, and I started to move along this path. This path went out into the light until you couldn't see the end of it anymore. And just as I'm starting to question this, should I go or is someone coming? All of a sudden, I felt myself falling backwards and down, falling down. Gravity was pulling me down. And I landed with a thud, and it hurt. And I opened my eyes, and here's two nurses Here's the ER doctor. I'm back on the gurney, and the ER doctor is standing there holding up a printout of my telemetry that they had been watching, and he's yelling at me, and he's shaking, holding this up and yelling at me and saying, I am so sorry this is happening to you, but I am so glad you are in my emergency room. And when I looked at that printout, my heart monitor was flatlined for 90 seconds. I know all about telemetry printouts because I've worked with them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's standing there all excited and can hardly get his words out and says, I have an ambulance on the way. I'm going to transfer you to St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Paul. I need to get you to the heart center right away. You need a pacemaker. You have complete heart block, and you need a pacemaker. And just as he said those words, the ambulance crew came running in. And what they had done was, while he's talking, they were applying what's called an external pacemaker in their pads. They put one on your chest and one on your left shoulder on the back of you. And what that does is that has the ability to send electrical current to your heart if your heart rate drops below a certain rate. And they had the machine calculated. If my heart rate went below 40, then I would receive an electrical current. And that was happening while I was on the gurney. I could feel it. And so, I had just come from God's presence, and now I'm on this gurney, and I'm trying to put it all together as fast as I can. I understood what, heart block is, for sure. But he said to me, he said, your heart rate dropped to 28. He said, consciousness is not able to be sustained with a heart rate below 40 in someone my age, in my general health. There are sports figures who their normal heart rate is 40, for example.
Right.
Because they've worked out all their lives, they're healthy, blah, blah, blah. But he said, I need you to get you to St. Joe's. So they put me in the ambulance, and the external pacemaker was doing its job. And I had a few shocks on the way. Got to St. Joe's, to the cardiac care unit, and there were like 5 doctors in the room waiting. So they bring me in. By this time, I had an IV going by that time. And, the doctors were looking at the record, looking at the EKG, at the telemetry readouts and that sort of thing. They had communicated with the ER doctor, obviously. By now it's midnight. So they explained to me what happened. I understood what they were telling me. And I hadn't had really any more of the losing consciousness part of that. But it was midnight, and now my blood pressure is stable. My pulse is back to normal rate. And they explained that they would keep on monitoring me. If there were any changes, they would go and do the pacemaker insertion if I was in that kind of danger. So here I am again, overnight. Here I am again, waiting. Well, the next morning came, and I went right away and had the pacemaker inserted. And am alive because of it. Now, here's the other part of the story, though, Mike. And I don't know if I've told you this. I had the pacemaker put in. It's an internal pacemaker. It's a double lead.
So this
One
is
lead goes into.
this is the story of when you first got the pacemaker, right?
Yeah.
So you didn't have one prior to this.
No.
Right.
No, not at all. But here I am. It's 6 years later, almost. Well, it was 6 years on March 6th. I've had this pacemaker for 6 years. When you have a pacemaker like I have, you're also equipped with a monitor wherever you're living. You have a monitor in your home next to your bed, and they do every 90 days. The hospital in your area, which is St. Cloud Hospital right now, the Heart Center does an interrogation, they call it, of your pacemaker while you're asleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
Every 90 days. And then every 2 years, I go into the hospital and they do a more in-depth and detailed kind of evaluation of the entire device. Okay, so I've been here going on, it will be 6 years in November. And when I go in, they show me the results. Here's what's happening. This is how your pacemaker's been working. The whole time that I've had this pacemaker, I have not had to use it once. Ever. And I say to them, what does that mean? Now this pacemaker has the potential to detect any arrhythmias, anything that might go wrong electrically with my heart. And there has been nothing that's been detected in these 6 years. So when I saw the cardiologist last November at my 2-year appointment, I looked at him and said, well, how about we just take this out? Since I don't need it, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looked at me and smiled and said, well, morally and ethically, we don't really do that. It's better to leave it right where it is and, consider that you are aging, you are getting older, the potential for something to happen is still there. So I still have the pacemaker. The only thing that has happened when I went and saw him in November, one lead is no longer functioning. And we don't know why. You'd have to literally go in and open up your chest and look at it and open your heart and look at the lead to see if you want to determine what's wrong. But one of the leads is no longer functioning. That just happened last November. So at that time, we discussed it, and he said to me, well, we need to replace that lead. That lead has to be replaced. And that's kind of where we are right now. Then this whole COVID thing hit.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, he said to me, we won't, you're okay, based on the information we have, we can leave it there until after the holidays, and then we'll bring you in and replace that lead. Take the damaged one out and put a new one in. So that's my story. And now the COVID-19 thing hit. But anyway, we haven't made any plans yet to do that.
Well, something happened before the COVID-19. You had a pulmonary emboli and a heart
Right.
failure.
Right.
So, what's going to get you, Mom? What is, something's going to get you. Maybe. I mean, maybe not. Are you ready to die, Mom?
Of course I'm ready to die. I want to go back.
Dang.
I want to go back there. That's something that, it's not that I've struggled with it, but it's on my mind constantly. I'd rather be there than here. And it's not really an obsession, but I think about it all the time. I'd rather be there than here, and I'm ready. Sure, I'm ready.
So, if COVID gets you, you could say, "Thank you, COVID."
I don't know if it'd be thank you, but I'm not afraid. I have absolutely zero people are afraid to die. That's not really true. What they're afraid of is how that death will happen. They're afraid of car accident, and then I'm a vegetable, but I'm still conscious in this horrible state.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah, that sort of thing.
Well,
and I'm just not afraid.
I'm glad to know that you're ready to go, because I'm glad you and I had been in conversation in these past like 6 months, and you
For sure.
and you relayed that story to me. And if you had died on December 9th, and we hadn't been talking, and you hadn't told me that story, that you were ready, I would just be, I don't know, I'd probably still be broken up. Like I didn't get to talk to my mom, but I had been speaking with you and emailing and communicating, and now you can't get rid of me.
Well, and the thing is, I and everybody will understand it when I say this. You say to yourself, why? Why didn't I stay? Why didn't I stay there? Well, you probably, in this life, I'm not ever going to be able to answer that. And the common sense explanation for me is, when God gives us life, He has a plan for that life. And I think about it in terms of, along my lifetime, there have been assignments probably that God has had in mind for me to complete before I go home. So now I think of it in terms of, there's an assignment or two, or hopefully 10, that I haven't completed. so that's what makes sense to me. There's something more that I need to complete. And maybe it's this with you.
You've stole my thunder. I was going to cut you off and say that, but you said it.
Oh.
Well,
maybe it's this. I don't know.
I wouldn't even say maybe. I would say that subject that I do want to do a segment on providence, but it seems to come into play all the time. The nature of providence, I think the things that happen are all intended, especially like something like this. It's good for you, it's good for me, and it's probably good for everybody who watches it, everybody who lasts all the way through these stories, even to the end here where we're talking, that there's something happening that was intended, and it's good. Like there are good things coming of this. And if
so, you need to keep this podcast going for at least 10 years.
Well, when I say if and when you die, like I've changed the way I say that. Like when you die, I say if and when you die, because we don't know when that moment, that last, when death will finally be swallowed in victory, like done, no more death. That means everybody alive will never die. So if and when you die, if you do, this recording will remain, and you will still be blessing people. Anybody can come across this video and listen and watch you tell this story. Right?
Can I interrupt you?
It's not an interruption when it's you.
Well, there was something that just popped into my mind that I have to say. Remember when I was talking about that bolt of lightning?
Yes.
Coming through my head and my entire body.
After 12 episodes, you like 12. Number 13 strikes.
I did. When I got to the ER, I did ask the ER doctor about that. I explained it, and I asked him. I said, "What was that pain?" It wasn't in my chest. It literally started through the top of my head, the pain, and shot through my entire body and went out my toes, my whole body. And he looked at me and he thought a minute. I don't think he knew what to say, but then he came came to the conclusion, he said, well, that was most likely a surge of adrenaline because your heart was in trouble. And that's how our body can signal trouble.
It's like, hello.
I think it was God. I think he struck me with a lightning bolt to get my attention. Look, stupid, are you going to do something or aren't you?
Yeah.
Do something about this.
Yeah, 12 strikes. That's a whole inning worth of batters plus one, you know.
Anyway. Adrenaline surge.
Well,
okay.
Thank you for telling that story, Mom. Documenting it here. We're going to wrap this segment up now.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.